Hi. Okay. Hi, everyone. Greetings from College Station, Texas, ENM. I'm Xingyue Ye. I'm current president for SDSC. This is our kind of the webinar series initiated this year. We hope we can use that to further build our community globally, and we can work together on some interesting ideas and possibly some proposals in the coming weeks or months. There are many opportunities. Let's see. Regarding spatial decision support consortium, we are kind of the global community formed by scholars across nations and from different universities, institutions, and industry. Originally, it started as a project at the University of Redlands in 2008. At that time, we want to create an ontology for spatial decision support system in order to facilitate the decision support system. This effort to build the project is still available on our website. If you go to our Spatial Decision Support Consortium, the website, in 2016, a number of us decided to formalize the group a bit more, and we created a chart and a board of directors. It's also in our website. So very luckily, in 2019, we received a National Science Foundation project to build a prototype of open knowledge network for spatial decision support. And you can find more information about that on our website. Although the grant has ended, we are still looking for ways to continue development as an open knowledge network of spatial decision support, including ontology development and a tool to support distributed browsing and editing of knowledge graphs. So that's our history and our efforts. And also that's a definite justification why we want to have webinars to attract more people to work with us. Okay, I will stop here. And Phil, do you want to talk about something about SDSC membership?
Muted, Phil. Thanks. Sorry. Yes. I don't think everyone here is a member, but most are. But yes, we would definitely like people to join the consortium. It allows us to push ahead on a number of directions. We have 4 work groups already, and definitely the more people we can get into these, the better. We have a case studies that's trying to look at in terms of spatial decision support, interesting uses of technology. Often with a GIS bent, but now more and more also with a knowledge graph and AI bent, on using this decision support for solving major issues. We have an ontology platform, which is, as Xingyue was saying, we had got a grant out, and we did a lot of work and are still have some ongoing efforts on building a knowledge graph. The particular one I'm focused on is around support for ecosystem decision making, and so, but there's a lot of interest in different directions around that. And so if people are interested in knowledge graphs and schema and how information can be gathered and conveyed, we'd like you to participate in that. And then we also have a spatial decision support framework for sustainability, and we have a workflow engine framework, where the latter being that we recognize that work gets done and things actually happen through workflows. And up to now, we've been lacking on the decision support side on really good workflows that allow us to go from early stages of gathering intelligence, bringing people together and gathering intelligence, all the way to actually making decisions. So we have a number of different work groups that are out there, and we're trying to get moving at speed. So if you join, you can help us with that, and of course you get be part of these webinars we're putting on. And if you've done interesting work yourselves, we'd love to pull you in as a member and have you provide webinars for us. So you can contact me or go through our website if you're interested in becoming a member at the end of this. There's a link, which I'm not sure is the best way to get that link out there. It's and I noted from a note from Sean. I just put it in the chat. It's free.
You just posted it.
Just posted it. Great. Okay, I just grabbed it, but I was going through it. Okay, that's it. Please join us. All right.
Great. Thanks, Philip. So I'm Sean Gordon. I'm the immediate past president of the SDSC, And it's my pleasure today to introduce our webinar speaker, Michele Campagna. Did I get the last name right, Michele?
Perfect.
Wow,
Campagna,
lucky.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was my pleasure to, he's a professor of spatial planning at the University of Cagliari in Italy. And I met him a few years ago at the first International Geodesign Consortium meeting, which is an interesting group that I'll post another link for in our chat here in a minute. And that was held with the annual Geodesign Summit that Esri puts on. And I was lucky enough to fall in with a group of Italians that made the conference fun, both personally and professionally. And I think Michele will tell you a little bit more about his background, but I did want to mention that he just hosted the National Planning Conference for Italy last month, I assume at your university there. So that was quite an event, I'm sure, that folks would be interested to hear more about. With that, I guess I will pass it over to you, Michele.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Michele Campagna, and I'm a professor of spatial planning at the University of Cagliari in Italy. And my background originally comes from civil engineering and architecture. Then between my master and my PhD, I turned to spatial planning. At that time, I had the opportunity to work on some real planning process before becoming a full-time academic. And I did my PhD in planning support systems. So my main interest since the very beginning was how to use technology and the computer to improve possibly planning. And about 10 years after I completed my PhD, and 10 years ago, I met Carl Steinitz and I started collaborating quite intensively with him, and I learned from him a lot about geodesign. And today I would like to share with you basically this experience. And I know that some of you are very experienced in geodesign, so probably I will tell something that is maybe very basic or even trivial, but at the same time I hope that my perspective in a way will be interesting for all of you. So probably I will go to share my screen now. Start my presentation. I hope. Can you see now in this presentation mode?
Yes, it looks good.
Thank you. So my presentation basically is divided in 4 parts. First of all, I would like to describe the context in which I work. Spatial decision support is a quite broad domain. I was reading again while preparing this presentation a little bit of general information in this website, and by definition, the spatial decision support can range from very simple tools to very complex model and decision making tools, including planning support system. So first of all, describing the context, I want to kind of put some constraint on the type of planning support and planning process that I mostly work on. Then I will describe some with reference to the Steinitz framework, the data and the tools that I tested along the year, and eventually I will enter in more detail in the use of the Geodesign Hub planning support system, which is a very effective tool to support a very specific workflow in the implementation of the geodesign framework, that is the geodesign workshop. And at the end, I will explain first the workflow and some technicalities based on my first case study, and then I will describe briefly more operational result from two case studies that actually one from 2019 and one from 2021, which where we applied this kind of methodologies and tools to real planning processes with real stakeholders. In particular, the last one was in the making of the Metropolitan Strategic Plan. So first of all, I'm based in Europe, and I think it is interesting to mention some recent element of innovation we brought from Europe into spatial planning in general. First of all, about 20 years ago, in 2001, the European Union adopted a directive on strategic environmental assessment, which introduced the impact assessment, an impact assessment procedure for any type of a spatial plan at all levels, both general and sector plan. But beside introducing specifically impact assessment, basically this directive introduced principles to enrich the planning process in terms of knowledge building, in terms of transparency, in terms of democracy. So it's influencing a lot the way we make plan in Europe. However, the full adoption is still far from being completed. Also, another important factor coming from Europe is the adoption of the INSPIRE directive in 2007, which established the infrastructure for spatial information in Europe, which means that basically all administration at all levels in all member states are starting sharing their spatial data in an integrated, interoperable way. In such context, like the context where I mostly work, which is the region of Sardinia in Italy, the regional government provided a job portal with more than 500 spatial data layers, including vector and raster data set. I would say pretty high resolution. This, in a way, should enable to use digital tools, geographic information system, and other tools to support planning. In reality, looking at the literature, the adoption in the planning practice of GIS is still very limited. In many countries in Europe, and not only in Europe, also in other developed countries, is limited. Many planners still don't use GIS, and we should question about this. But anyway, this is the situation. Also, we are living after the pandemic and recent global process. Europe is going green with a very strong investment, giving a lot of funds to member states to implement the green transition and the digital transition as a way to actually address the economic crisis and other type of crisis coming after the pandemic, starting from the pandemic. On the background, all of us refer to Sustainable Development Goals. And I think when we talk about planning and about planning processes, I think SDG 11.3 is particularly interesting in that promote sustainable planning and also the participation of the broader community in planning effort. This is not new. If we look back on the years, we found that Forgedis, which introduced in a way what later became the McCarthy design with nature, he also thought about planning as a process, as an educational process for the community. So in a way, but still we are trying to understand how to do that. And coming back to McCarthy, already in 1978, he was promoting a new role for the planner, not anymore a planner as a designer, able to provide final solution to community problem, but rather a planner as a facilitator, who should guide the community in find a design solution for solving their problem. And a few years later, John Friedman, in the revision of the traditional planning curriculum, also proposed as a proposal for the planner to develop skill in negotiation. Again, because the planner is not anymore the expert who make a final design to solve a community problem in a study area, but is rather an expert who should support the community and many part of the community in interacting and making decisions together. So all these reflect in the type of method and tools we should use to support such kind of planning process. Most recently, Simin Dawoodi argued for also for new models for making planning. She proposed an adaptive planning approach as opposed to the traditional blueprint planning in order to address a changing concept of resilience, who passed from a traditional engineering approach to a more evolutionary approach. And this new adaptive planning process should be characterized by several conditions, including agile institutional framework, highly networked and reflective planners, and inclusive processes to draw on diverse voices and values and multiple forms of knowledge, from systematic and experimental knowledge to tacit and experiential experiences. In this background, strategic spatial planning became quite popular in the last decades in Europe, and strategic planning is a documented theoretical model in literature, but more operationally can be defined as a process through which a variety of public and private actors with a stake in the region, such as public sector planners, politicians, private landowners, and organizations representing the community and environmental issue, come together in diverse institutional settings to prepare strategic plans by developing interrelated strategies for the management of spatial change. And in many contexts, I know better the Italian context, strategic plans are mostly verbal. And I believe that strategic plan should also have a stronger and explicit spatial component. So the main challenges of strategic planning present us several challenges. In many cases, when we think about metropolitan strategic planning, we have to deal with an intermunicipal process which requires horizontal and vertical subsidiarity and interaction between administration on different levels. Most of the time is a multi-scale effort, in the sense that metropolitan regions are large regions, but at the same time, then metropolitan strategic plans are implemented by local administration, which acted at a larger scale. It's a multi-actor process by definition, and have to deal with the complexity in the territorial system, where at different scale, all different systems from green to blue to gray infrastructure and housing and industry and agriculture and other system, tourism, in some cases, cultural heritage, have to interact and work well together. There is a complexity in governance, because strategic plans is a new tool to make governance, so there is no tradition, and many forms are experimented. And it requires an integrated multi-sector approach, in the sense that the strategic plan is the first step before going to implementing project. There is a need for consensus because for its complexity, it's difficult to implement strategic plans without the collaboration of all the actors in the community, and there is need for economic support. And when we think about the current season in Europe, where there are a lot of funds available to member states. To access the funds, for sure, is needed to have preliminary consensus by the local communities. In the background, we want transparency and participation as a main sustainable development goal. In this, geodesign offer a lot of useful methodologies and tools. It applies system thinking, so it easily integrate. It facilitates comprehensive approach to planning. It is collaborative and can be participatory, for sure, support multi-actor processes, enable with the current technology quick design of alternative, enable with the current technology real-time impact assessment, more or less sophisticated. It supports decision based on negotiation, which is probably the best way when we have a multi-actor process, and provides spatially explicit strategies, which are, as I mentioned, often lacking in strategic spatial plan. And the available technology are nowadays user-friendly, and this is a big step in advance, because in the past 20 or 30 years, we had fantastic, from the point of view of the research tools, planning support tools, planning support system, but most of them were eventually designed and usable only for experts, and this fact was probably one of the main limitations in the first generation of planning support system. Also, geodesign with its methodology and the geodesign framework, I believe, provide a flexible multi-scale approach. So, as a general definition, geodesign is a set of technique and enable technologies for the planning the built and natural environments in an integrated process, including all the phases of the process. And this is also a difference if we look back at the first generation of planning support system, some of which were more sophisticated, who could support different tasks in a planning process, but probably very seldom all the planning process. Geodesign makes the relationship between design and its geographical content explicit, and the design is dynamically related to a multi-scale computational representation of environment. This way, not only applying geodesign, we can apply ex-ante impact evaluation of our plan or planning alternatives before making decision, but also we are able to inform the creation of alternative looking at the environment. And when we say environment, we consider natural, abiotic, and biotic environment, as well as anthropic, social, economic, cultural environment. For many of us, I assume that this is quite well understood concept, but still, when I look at the practice, these principles are barely implemented. And if I look at the planning school in many European countries, also I barely see explicit application of this concept. So, as I mentioned, I deeply relied on the Steinitz framework, which I believe, which actually, when I discovered the Steinitz framework, I could put in a proper place all my previous knowledge and fill the many gaps in my previous knowledge. So this is why I believe it's very, very effective and useful and flexible. When we look at in the cover of the framework, Steinitz tells us that there is no a planner anymore, but rather, as in the McCart view and others' view, there is a team of people who collaborate in the plan-making process. Depending on the scale, the leads can be large-scale architectural, urban design. The lead can be to the design professional. When we go to the small scale, uncertainty increase, and possibly the scientists, like in addressing global climate change, the scientists have the say. But nevertheless, when we work in the middle of the scale, there must be a sharing among all these people, and so we have to find the proper media and the proper technology which is understandable by all, also in interacting with the local community, and information technology support us in that. I think it's important also to mention a little bit of detail, especially for those of you who are less familiar, possibly with the framework. The science framework is composed, the core of the framework is represented by 6 models and 3 iterations. In building a planning process or a geodesign study, depending on how we prefer to call it, but for me, the 2 things are the same. From the planning perspective, we start gathering data and we try to understand the study area. Then we try to understand how this is the representation model, so we use data for that. Then we use this input to try to understand how the study area is evolving in hypothesis of no change, the business as usual case, how the study area is evolving will not change. And then we have to understand whether we like or we don't like this evolution. We contextualize information to the specific problem in the study area, and we can make evaluation applying expert knowledge, applying regulation, also applying needs and wills of the community. And from a technical perspective, we use spatial data for building the representation model. We use spatial and temporal data because we study dynamics in time when we build the process model, and we use spatial temporal data and values when we build the evaluation model. This is basically the knowledge building phase, which give input to the creation of generation of alternatives, which is represented by the change model, which is again data. Design alternatives are subject to impact assessment, and this creates information and eventually knowledge to inform decision. The way we implement all this model can be very different depending on the approach. We can apply and build the framework and build the 6 model in a very technical way, or we can do in a participatory way, or most of the time, I think, in a mixture of both. So the way the actors this broad audience of actors who participate to the planning process basically can be very different. We can involve even citizens starting from the representation model, or we can develop the first 3 models in a very technical way and then involve the actors for the community in the proper design design phase, starting from also called the intervention phase, starting in the change models. So now I will very quickly, briefly give some example of application of technology, most of which is probably well known by you, but just to show how it can be all integrated and to support a single process. As I mentioned, now we have a wide availability of digital data in Europe, in many regions, maybe not in all the regions, but this is becoming probably the standard with the implementation of the Inspire directive. And so the first thing the starting point of our studies or our planning process is gathering the data we need, integrating those data in our database. However, this is a job for experts, but as we are interacting with the community, we need also to find other medium to share the data, and application interactive job browser, more or less sophisticated, are very useful in this respect. When we go to the process model, this is not my real field of expertise, but we can find use more or less sophisticated model. There is a long tradition in developing very sophisticated model. More recently, agent-based model were very popular in many respects. And this enable us to simulate a possible future scenario with or without changes. And this way we can have either a process or an impact model. But also what I found in my experience, I did work several years, last decade, when social media data were more available, using different data sources, and I discovered that I realized that social media data have a strong temporal dimension, so can be very useful in understanding social processes, which are often not documented in official data. When we go to the evaluation model, we have since many years, many advanced methodologies. We have even very sophisticated planning support system. In this example, in the municipality of Sardinia, there is an interactive kind of suitability model developed in ArcGIS with community bits planning support system, where the user can select from a number set, from a big set of criteria, assign weight and calculate the most suitable solution depending on, and exploring survey decisional, spatial decisional space. But all these things are more or less well understood. What I found, again, using experimenting the application of social media geographic information, is that when we deal with, when we attach values to data in the evaluation model and building our evaluation models, also social media geographic information can be very useful. In the map on the right side of the slide, for example, we mapped the positive evaluation of tourist accommodation using booking data, and this enable thinking about the possible strategic plan, tourism plan, sustainable tourism plan in Sardinia, suggest immediately where there is more or less need to intervene with the process. The change model is in a way is simple. It's very easy now to have a sophisticated input device to save in a digital database our design alternative, and based on that, using interactive dashboard, again in this example, an application of the community bits and planning support system on ArcGIS, we can immediately, while editing and a design proposal, immediately calculate a wide number of impact indicators to check the robustness of our design. Nevertheless, when I try to use this kind of tool outside of my laboratory, on my university laboratory, was very difficult, especially if I had to interact with a big number of people. The system was not user-friendly, fast, and responsive enough for a communicative kind of work with different stakeholders. Nevertheless, may be very useful in the practice. So, while the representation process evaluation model are quite well understood, we have big data, big spatial data availability to work on. I noticed that there is, what is less understood is the step between the creation of knowledge and the use of this knowledge to make decision, to create a design alternative and to make decision. Regarding the decision model, I worked several years ago on an approach that I call meta planning, that is the design of the planning process, which actually is included in a way in the science framework as a second iteration, on the idea that using business process management tools and languages, a planner could design the workflow for a complex planning process with a standard language, which is user-friendly for the planner and understandable by system developers, planning support system developers, as well as machine readable, and associating actors to task pieces of information, databases, and processing services could be possible to generate what I call a second generation PSS, that is planning support system which are generated based on the process. And because I think that one of the main pitfalls of the first generation of PSS is that in a way they impose the planners to use a specific process, whatever flexible they could be. And when we focus now in the use of the knowledge we create in the first part, in the application of the first part of the framework, to make design alternative, evaluate them in terms of impact, and make decision, this is where more sophisticated, newer planning support systems are useful. And several years ago, I think it was back in 2014 or maybe a little bit earlier, I had the chance to participate to the testing of the new planning support system, Geodesign Hub, who was developed by Dr. Rishi Balal during his PhD studies at the University College London under the supervision of Carsten Heinz and Mike Batty. And since then, I found this technology, which was developed based on taking the framework as a guide, was exceptionally useful. And so now I will describe standard workflow in applying Geodesign Hub, and then I will describe at the end of my presentation two case studies developed in the real planning practice. So the starting point, this case study was developed when Carsten visited our university in 2016, and this was the opportunity for me to run the first geodesign study on the metropolitan city of Cagliari, which is the capital city in Sardinia, which was at that time just established. The metropolitan city of Cagliari includes 17 municipalities who never talked to each other before. So we start gathering data, looking at the reality. Here some evocative picture just to make you give you an idea about the study area, and enable us to identify 10 systems: cultural heritage, ecology, hazard, natural hazard, tourism, commerce and industry, agriculture, high and low density housing, transport, and smart innovation hub. For each of the systems, we generated an evaluation map based on which is the output of the evaluation model. We set target, we set up a simple cross-system impact model. We assign standard cost to the different action in the system, and we start. And in 2 days, we involved about 30 people in a room, each one with his computer, to interact in the geodesign workshop. The first part of the workshop, based on after the presentation of the technology, which is very user-friendly, and then of the input data represented by the evaluation map, we asked the participant to play the role of a system expert and to propose diagrams representing project and or policies, and to create in a crowdsourcing exercise a shared matrix of project and policy diagrams arranged by column, by system. In the second phase of the workshop, the participants were joined design team with different interests and objectives, and based on that, the different teams start to select different project and policy and start to create synthesis, complex development scenarios. And the Geodesign Hub enabled to calculate on the fly, real time, simple impact indicators, which supported the development of different versions of the synthesis, provide the simulation of the spatial impact of each synthesis. Nothing really accurate, but something which can give a red or a green flag to while developing the design synthesis. Then the synthesis developed by different group with different decision models, different priorities with regard to the system were compared. And in the third part of the workshop, through negotiation, coalition were created, and from several different design alternative based on different objective, through negotiation, we arrive from 6 to 3 and then to a final version. And eventually, I show this picture because everybody were happy. And in my experience, I did many workshops. At the end of any workshop, people are happy because the workshop exercise is very rewarding and fulfilling. In that occasion, we also interacted with them. We exported the data we produced in the workshop in Geodesign Hub, and we ingested those data in a more complex impact model in community bits. Also, geodesign, specificity of Geodesign Hub is that all the data about the design evolution and about the process, who contributed when, at what stage, are saved as log data in the system. So you can use those data to in a post-processing analysis of the workflow of the design and of the workflow social interaction among the stakeholders. And Chiara Cocco, in collaboration also with myself, Anna Clara Moura, and Piotr Jankowski, developed in her PhD on geodesign process analytics. A crucial stage, in my view, in my experience, in developing the geodesign workshop is the preparation of the evaluation map. And this is also the most time-consuming part. Some colleague, because of that, decided not to give a lot of relevance to the evaluation map, but I think this is a big mistake, because this is the first stage when we actually express our values. In a way, we inform the design. Using a standard classification, again, proposed first by Kasteinitz, we applied this classification many times. Basically, I developed a simple table which basically enabled me to document the evaluation model, starting from a general definition, applied to the local study area, the local scale, customized to the local scale and local problems, and which allow to record and keep track actually of locational criteria to identify different suitability classes from existing, where the system is existing and working well, so there is no need for change, not appropriate when we have feasibility constraint, or different level of suitability. And filling this table, I can identify, first start from the verbal language, natural language, and slowly go to define locational criteria, and then what data do I need and operation that I have to apply to those data to eventually create the evaluation map. And also, again, this in building this model, I can use only expert knowledge, and sometimes I follow this way. In other way, I ask the review of decision maker, and in a way I also try to integrate also the local knowledge for local people, which usually have no expert knowledge. In order to make this, to avoid any black box effect, I use usually the story map technology to create a representation that show both the evaluation maps and the data that I use to define the spatial criteria and operation, so that the user of this map can in a way understand why one area is green, one area is red, and especially if this is not consistent with their local knowledge. In this way, we apply this several times, and this make the maps acceptable. I have some example, but I see the time is running. Interesting enough, in some cases we use social media geographic information, where official data were not available to document certain processes. We use, of course, OpenStreetMap. We use also Flickr images, georeference images, and in some cases this was very useful. And on this base, participants in a workshop can propose their project. This evaluation map in a very easy interface are overlaid with the satellite data so that the participant, even with no expert knowledge, can immediately understand where they are and can georeference their local knowledge and integrate it in the use in the reading of the evaluation map. So I apply this workflow many times. Since the time is running, I will go straight to the last workshop, which last application, which was the most important, I believe, because this time was not a research project, was not an education workshop, but was a real workshop within the making of the strategic plan of the metropolitan city of Cagliari. And the participants were representatives from the 17 municipalities, including elected officials and or technical staff, or both. Since we were in spring 2021, we were still in the pandemic, we decided to not to meet in presence as in earlier experience, but to meet in Zoom. I had the chance to test this opportunity with Castanitz many times within the activity of the International Geodesign Collaboration, so I felt confident enough to propose this mode also to the real stakeholders. Of course, I was aware, I was proposing to them. They didn't know me before. I arrived from the university and I was proposing to them a totally different way of working. And I was told later that there were a lot of criticism and skepticism was recorded. Nevertheless, I knew this since earlier experience, so I carried on. And in 12 hours, in 4 sessions, 3 hours long, distributed in 2 weeks, 17 municipalities managed to propose more than 250 project and policy diagrams, and to create group of municipalities, spatially different spatial locations. They were able to develop their own design synthesis. I push a lot because when they started the exercise, every municipality, of course, proposed project for within the boundary, but this was the first time that they were working in a metropolitan planning process. So one of my objectives was to let them understand the reality of the new recently established metropolitan city, which, by the way, was the final decision maker in the process. In this case, the municipality actually wanted to have their voice heard by the higher level of government, and especially for smaller municipalities which were not very represented in the Metropolitan Council, this was very important. Eventually, we compare the different designs by the different group, and we, through negotiation, identify different priorities. And the project was substantially good in quality. Project with priority 1 eventually was constitute the skeleton of the design scenario, and with a project with less priority was complementary in a way, going down to priority 4 projects which were mostly local projects. And eventually, the final result of the workshop were included in the final document of the plan, which is currently under implementation. So basically, the municipality managed to have to see their proposal, many of their proposals implemented or on the way of implementation. I ran a question survey to the participant to investigate different aspects. Eventually, the participants were, as usual, at the end of the workshop, were mostly happy. Many of them gave direct sign, personal sign, but also looking at the result, I won't enter in detail here. Basically, many aspects of the workshop were mostly appreciated. So the result was a very successful experience with large appreciation by participants, which usually arrive at the end and is not present at the beginning, where skepticism and criticism is more dominant. There was a strong mutual learning and the creation of new perspective by the participant, and especially a move from a local perspective to a more metropolitan perspective by many of them. We managed to have a co-design bottom-up approach, to build consensus, to have input for the final decision, and the municipality had their voice heard. And the plan is currently under implementation. So to conclude, I think we managed in a way to avoid big mistake in the creation of this strategic plan in terms of locating project in wrong location, which is something that happens still very often in traditional planning, or used to happen until a few years ago, like building a residential area in a flooding prone areas, something that is very, let's say, should not happen, but it still happen very often. We managed to have an interactive impact assessment to orient decision. Collaboration was strong, negotiation had to be consensus, and all the process was transparent to the participant, and the way we document the process also enabled to be transparent to external audience. And I think this kind of working is very effective and reliable in all the process, which should repeated often and which are required to respond fast and to adapt to uncertain rapid dynamics, such as in conditions of natural hazard, or to mention a very hot topic now in post-war reconstruction. I leave some reference on the background, and I stop here. Sorry if I was a little bit longer than expected, and I'm open to question if there is still more time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Michele. That was a wonderful journey from the evolution of planning theory to a recent application in the real world. It's a great journey. Yeah, we're open to questions now. You can either raise your hand and ask it verbally, or type it into the chat. We have one already, I see, from Robert Voss, asking if you've published this case study yet.
Let me open the chat. I publish not yet in detail the Cagliari case study. What I did, I publish short papers on the comparison of different case studies. One was focusing on this case, in the comparison between this case study and a previous case study, which I had with 5 municipalities in strategic tourism planning. And another one was on iteration. I used this case study many times. When I show the workflow, I use the data from the first one, but then myself with Castanis, we used the same data many times. So we have basically probably a dozen of iteration of the case study, which is also a very interesting repository to make analysis and to see, for example, what is the influence of the evaluation maps eventually when you work with I don't know, when I visit the university in Sweden or with a Swedish student, and when I work with the local municipalities. You mentioned, Sean, earlier, we hosted the Italian National Planning Conference, Association Conference a few weeks ago here in Cagliari, and I ran the same exercise with 60+ planning PhD student in planning coming from all over Italy, and was also very interesting experience. So yeah, I plan to publish publishing a good paper requires some time. Actually, in one of the earlier case study, we produce detailed technical report, and I would like also to publish that one, which is available in Italy, in Italian, but I would like to publish that in English, because also can be, there are many details that can be useful for others, I believe.
Great, thank you. I saw Piotr had a hand up, not sure.
Hi, Piotr.
Hi,
to see you.
Michele. Great to see you too. Thanks for an inspiring talk. That was great. Well, my question is fairly simple. Given that the Steinitz framework has 3 phases, 1, 2, and 3, help me understand, where would you position along that workflow of the 3 phases, the work you've described? Was it phase 1 or 2 or maybe 3?
I'm not sure I got your point, Piotr. I mentioned during the workflow 3 main phases. The first one is a design diagram crowdsourcing, when this big matrix of project proposal is shared among the different participants. The second phase is the creation of design synthesis by design teams, which usually design teams can be arranged, for example, by different objectives: developers against the green, against the public administration, or by space. In the Cagliari case study, the real case study, the real planning process, we decide to group municipalities by location, neighboring municipalities. And this was done already in the Georgia case study by Rivero and colleagues. So depending on the type of project, you create different teams. In another case study, in the Oristano Golf case study, we have 5 municipalities. One day we went through all the process with the 5 municipalities. When they agree, we invited for a second day developers, the green and cultural heritage organization to develop also their own design synthesis, and then we compare, and then we negotiate a final solution. And all this part basically take as input the evaluation model, the evaluation maps actually, as a data input, and produce the final design, the final decision, actually down to the final decision. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. What I was hinting at, asking about the phases is, and again, my knowledge of this Steinitz model is not as complete as yours, but in my understanding, phase 1 is where you go through all 6 models, and you do it in a sort of a preliminary way, and then you concretize the workflow as you go through phase 2, and eventually in phase 3, you go to very detailed work.
I see your point now, Piotr. These are called the 3 iteration. I attach my name to each of them. The first one I call scoping, because basically you try to understand how to deal with this to a new process, new study area, new objectives, new needs. The second one, and you go, of course, you start gathering data to understand what's going on, and you do it quite rapidly. Once you have an idea of what are the issues, what are the stakes, then you can go down to the decision model and decide who is going to participate, which is not all cases the same people. Basically we try to have broad processes, but this is not always the case. There may be a specific constraint originating by the study area, originating by the local sociocultural context. At that point, once you know who is going to participate, you can go backward in the second iteration, which I call meta planning, At that point, depending on who is participating, you can define at that point what kind of format, data format, what kind of tools you need to develop, what kind of impact model. In geodesign, for example, impact model is very rough, but it's very fast. So give you an idea. And in some cases, this is enough. In other cases, probably you need to download the data, to ingest it in community vids, and you want to calculate, I don't know, to run a dashboard with 20 performance indicator to make very quantitative analysis. This depends by whom is eventually and how, who and how is making the decision. And this way you can go backward down to the, depending on the impact model, you decide what is the way you represent the design, and back and back and back down to the representation model. At that point, you know better what data you need. Because as Carl say often, we don't want the most data, we want the least data. And by experience, I definitely agree with that. At that point, you are ready, you know how the process is going to be developed, what are the main tasks, what are the data you need, what are the tools you are going to use, and you can run the iteration. In reality, there is not such a linear 1, 2, 3. Eventually, it's a little bit blur, and depending on your experience, it may be maybe just one iteration. And as I said, I did several, I use the term iteration differently now, but different run of the same study in different contexts, first for research, then for education, and then within the IGC with the International Geodesign Collaboration following specific guideline, and then eventually with the local stakeholders was always a little bit different. But each run taught me something, and I learned something new, and then eventually we could apply with the real stakeholders at the end.
Thank you very much. That helps.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any of their hands up at the moment, so there's opportunity. Mr. Murphy jumped right in.
Hey, Michele, that was a great talk, and great to hear the success you're having with that and with the technology. And I really like that Piotr's question, because that was exactly mine. Was you know, we fight all the time with, you know, let's go get the data, you know, before we even talk to anybody. And you know, I think you've explained very well how those two first passes, 2 iterations through the process really help. And one thing that in particular, I think that you were mentioning, I think I understood early on, was one of the things that I've found is designing the actual process itself. Like, as you say, what tools you're going to use, how are you going to set up your webinars and workshops, who's going to be at them, and so forth. That design part, I think, is really, really critical. And I think from my understanding is that that's where some of the, you showed some brief slides of work you're doing that would sort of give you a meta design tool for designing that. Is that available, or how far along have you got with that? That sounded very interesting. Thanks.
Actually, on the part that I call meta planning, I published a paper back in 2016. Mm-hmm. So this available is very basic research. Basically, I did some very simple experiment in using business process modeling and notation to map simple pieces, simple processes, and then to use that information in a standard language to orchestrate the integration of services. And I did it with a very simple procedure: read data, apply a function, save data in different, read data from a server, use a function from as a web processing service from another server, and save in another server. So the idea of build a service-oriented, I kind of piloted a little piece of building a planning support system based on the process using.
Because that was actually the original genesis of this consortium back in 2008 in the University of Redlands. We were trying to figure out how we create a language that, you know, like a Forest Service manager who wants to pull together a NEPA process here in the United States, how could they start a process, and we provide them with a interface that they could basically build their own workflow in language that they could understand, not what we technologists understand. And here we are, 15 years later, still trying to make progress on that. And that's why one of our groups, subgroups, is a workflow subgroup, because it's still very much, we're still trying to make progress on that. So it's great to see that.
So yeah, basically, I think business process modeling and notation developed quite fast, probably in the second decade. So probably 2008 was a little bit early. Of course, I remember that several other tools and frameworks, technology frameworks were available even before. But eventually, business process modeling and notation became a standard, is widely applied in the IT industry. And of course, if the workflow is simple, it may work very well. If I'm, for example, I want to create a web application to issue a plane ticket. Okay, this is a simple process. And this is basically you have the expert, the business expert, we create the diagram, and then the diagram is passed through the system expert, or since it is machine readable, to a system that orchestrates the creation of the app. Of course, the planning process is never a simple workflow, so is more difficult to think about it. But the notation is very expressive, and I think is very good to map planning processes as well. And I did some experimental example, and then yeah, maybe I wonder whether recent development in artificial intelligence can help to, in a way, further automate and make even more robust this kind of approach.
Right. Thanks.
Now, Michele, you mentioned that the geodesign hub saves some type of process data.
Yes.
What kind of process data does it save?
Basically, for each diagram, you have a number of attributes. Some are semantic attributes, such as cost of the project, name of the project, the system within the project is proposed. But it also saves data about when it is created, by whom it is created, when it is selected, by whom it is selected. And this opens a huge possibility for to analyzing backward the process. Actually, Chiara Cocco in her PhD also created a real-time dashboard, simulated the real-time dashboard under the assumption that a workshop coordinator, when you have, like, assuming that you either work on Zoom or in a room with 50, 60 people, and you can implement this workshop on 60 people. I think some colleagues run some pilot even with 100 students. So the idea is that the role of the coordinator is very important in guiding the participant, because if you want to make an agreed scenario in 12 hours with 50 people and 17 municipalities, is quite hard. So in order for the workshop coordinator to understand, of course, if you are in a room, you can observe to a certain extent. In Zoom, in virtual rooms, you can observe. The coordinator may work with several assistants, so there is the possibility to observe what's going on, but having also the possibility to have a dashboard and see to observe, for example, if one actor is dominant, or if if there are actors who are not working, or either they are kind of shy or less active in proposing. So you can monitor all of this. At the same time, you can monitor the design, of course. And so this idea of geodesign process analytic is about monitoring, analyzing either after the workshop or during the workshop, both the evolution of the design and the behavior of the participant.
Cool.
Any other questions, thoughts? I had one more on the Cagliari strategic plan. So this was new to them, a new approach. What do you know about the approach they took previously? Was it just less spatial, less explicit?
Yeah, actually the strategic plan making process was last 2 years. Our workshop last 2 weeks at the end. So many actors were involved, and I was involved. I was invited to participate because the call, I want a tender. Actually, I was a consultant for a group who won a tender issued by the Metropolitan Authority. And in the call, they asked specifically for to apply innovation in the making of the plan. I don't know what they were expecting, but we went out with geodesign, which was definitely innovative. In all the other phases, questionnaire survey, either live, paper-based or digitally online, were used with citizen. Other stakeholders were involved with more traditional living labs, typical, well-known type of collaborative activities. And before we ran the workshop, actually, some colleagues were collecting data about project by municipality using an Excel file. So definitely using Geodesign Hub has also this very, let's say, simple advantage of having a spatial database of the project. But at the same time, the spatial database was shared with everybody and available to everybody to create their own complex proposal and integrate their own project with other projects, integrating green infrastructure with blue infrastructure, and maybe a cycling path, cultural heritage, and create really a meaningful scenario, and which eventually is now being implemented with in the final planning document. There is no the final map that we produce in the workshop, but all the projects were then connected to main strategies and in a way disassembled. But our step was interesting to see that they can all work together, and they had a spatial location. So eventually, the metropolitan authorities was extremely satisfied by the process, because soon after we finished and they approved the plan, they start collecting public funding, and they could do it just because they had this strategic plan.
Right. Well, one final call for questions, and then we'll wrap it up officially.
Hey,
All
thanks
right.
so much. Yeah.
Well, yes. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you very much.
Presentation.
Thank you for having me.